Hi there. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Awbrie and I'm one of the junior education majors here at Bushnell. This spring, I did some research on how we can address emotional overload in elementary classrooms. So, a little bit of background on my research. I spent this semester in a second grade Zoom classroom, and we just recently moved on to a hybrid model. And in that Zoom classroom, I was working with these students who are really great. I loved all of them, but I had one student who was having these really aggressive emotional outbursts. And when I say aggressive, I don't mean that she was becoming violent or aggressive in herself, but these outbursts would seemingly come out of nowhere and make it to where she was so distraught, so upset that she was having to leave the classroom. It was happening, as I said, seemed like out of nowhere, but through further observation, I did notice that during sharing times, if she was interrupted, which was a big problem we had with our entire class, was interrupting and unmuting themselves when they shouldn't be because they're second graders and they want to talk. But whenever that would happen to her, she would get really frustrated. It would also happen if she was experiencing technical issues, if she got answers wrong and didn't understand why, if she was just stuck on something and couldn't figure it out. She would get really upset, start crying, and have to take herself away from the classroom. And she started missing really valuable time with me and my cooperating teacher, my supervisor, where we couldn't see where she was at academically, and it was making it a challenge to be able to come alongside her and help her be successful. So that sent me out asking, how can I as an educator address the emotional overload issues that I'm seeing in these elementary age students, and really how can I do that, not just for these students but for students in future classrooms that I'm in. So, a couple of important things to note: emotional outbursts can be caused by so many things, from ADHD to anxiety to it being a trauma response. Because of that, every student requires unique attention. So, what works for one student may not work for another, and that has to be okay with us as educators and as people working with kids in general, because otherwise we're going to become frustrated and they sense that and they pick up on that and they will become more frustrated. It's also important to not diminish or minimize the things that these kids are going through and feeling, because it's very real to them. We may not see it as a big deal. We may not understand why they're so upset, but they are upset, and it's important to recognize that. So, the research that I did specifically related to how I can address it, not what caused it, not why it's different, but how I can address it. The first one that stood out to me a lot was using literature to support teaching emotional well being as well as coping skills. Kids respond really well to stories. It's one of the reasons that it's how we transferred information from time to time. It's easier for kids to understand because it's a skill that they have. It's them learning through a character that they can look up to and say, oh, that character's like me, and they're able to learn those skills. It's also important to promote a persistence related coping strategy rather than adult contact coping, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But basically, we want to make them think, I can do it even when they're frustrated. It's also important to allow for self distancing. So, allow those students to remove themselves from the learning environment if that's what they need. But you have to teach them, just like you have to teach them reading or writing, you need to teach them how to do it effectively and how to make it a worthwhile thing for them to do. Lastly, it's important to celebrate positive emotions and celebrate when they're able to recognize those things, while also providing fair recognition and space for processing when things aren't going the way they want it to or things aren't easy for them. So, results. Unfortunately, I didn't get to implement my strategies with this student particularly, for a lot of different reasons. I would want to observe some more now that we are in that hybrid model. Does being in a face to face classroom change what I've seen? Is she getting less frustrated? Because if so, we need to do a little bit less intentional work with her and more just overall with the whole class teaching these skills, because it is important for all of them. It's also something I would want to see, how would it impact this student particularly? How would these strategies that I'm going to talk about and I have talked about a little bit help this particular student's emotional overload? So, a couple of things when I'm in my own classroom, these are some of the things I want to implement very intentionally because of the research I did and things I want to consider. So, I want to create a space in my classroom for students to be able to self distance, like that research said. That also includes techniques for using that effectively because I want to teach that. So, that could be helping them learn the zones of regulation. An educator did a lot of research and found that this is a way that we can help kids identify and target emotions. So if they're feeling bored or frustrated or angry or scared, they can put that into a zone and we can move from there. It's also important to give them an opportunity to remember those different calm down strategies we've taught them. So whether that's taking a walk or exercising or writing things down, um, setting a timer, making it, okay, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to kind of work through this. You can give them fidget spinners. They are not maybe the most academic tool, but it helps them take their mind off whatever's frustrating them. And so that's important to be able to remind students of how they can calm down. The next thing is that I want to teach about and check in with students' mental health consistently. So it's really important. Social emotional learning is learning about what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and how your feelings affect other people as well. And that's something that's super important to teach kids because if you're not going to teach them that, they can't be successful with it. It's also, this is something that a teacher on TikTok actually posted a little bit less than a year ago. And it's a mental health check-in. Every day, her students anonymously will write their initials on the back of these sticky notes that you see, and they will put it on what they're feeling. So if they're feeling great, they'll put it there. And if they're really struggling for some reason, they don't have to talk about why, but they can just put it there so that she can see where they're at that day. The last thing that I really want to do is teach problem solving and persistence related coping. So, problem solving, I want them to say, I'm frustrated, that's okay, here's some solutions, and here's how I can solve that. I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I can reread the directions. I can ask a peer. I can see what I can remember on my own and then do these things. I can figure it out on my own. That's really important. And it really ties into the idea of this growth mindset. So when we say this is hard, instead I want them to say, this is going to take some time and effort, and that's okay. Instead of I'm a failure, I want them to be able to say, I'm still learning, and that's okay. So those are kind of the strategies I want to implement in my own classroom. There are so many other opportunities and there's so many other great things. And here's some of that research cited. Um, so I definitely would encourage any teacher or anybody that's working with kids to really go and dig into this a little deeper because there is so much out there, both on how you can address it in the person and online, um, depending on the circumstances. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.